To start your sugar skull, you have the option of starting in 3 different ways. You could start with the magic loop. Here you can see I've wrapped my yarn 2 times around my fingers in order to create a tighter centre. Or you could start with a chain of 4, this being your middle chain and then the chain of 3 that starts the pattern. Or you can start by chaining 4, joining with a slip stitch and then working into that loop. You would start then also with a chain of 3. Then, no matter what loop you're working into, you're going to do 11 trebles, that is a US double, into the centre of your loop. Your treble is worked by doing a yarn over, inserting your hook, yarning over to pull up a loop, yarning over, pulling through 2, yarning over and pulling through 2. So you're going to yarn over and insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over through 2, yarn over through 2. And that is your UK treble and your US double. You're going to work 12 of your trebles / doubles into the ring, and then once you're finished, you will tighten it. Because I've worked mine as a double loop magic ring, I give a slight tug on the yarn tail, which moves one of the threads. This then signals to me which one to pull first to tighten, and that will tighten off the one that is closest to the knot. And then I am able to tighten the rest of the loop, and that will just mean that it's nice and tight and doesn't move as I continue to work. I'm then going to work a slip stitch into the top of the first stitch of the round. This means as we continue our rounds, we won't end up with a bar across on our joined rounds. For your second row, you're going to start by chaining 3, and then you will do a treble or US double into the same stitch that you joined with at the end of the previous round. This will mean that we then work doubles all the way around, and by working into the top of that first stitch and not the chain, we'll work the last pair of stitches into the bar that was our slip stitch from the previous round, and this will cover the bar and give us a more seamless look at the end. So working 2 trebles into each stitch. And here, this is the slip stitch that we did, so just going to work underneath that to do your final 2 trebles of the round. Then again, we're going to do a slip stitch into the top of the first stitch to fasten off our join, ignoring that chain, and we'll then continue to work from there. You'll start at round 3 by doing a chain 3 again, and then working a treble into the same stitch that you did your slip stitch into at the base of the chain. You'll then do 1 treble into the next stitch. You'll then follow the pattern of doing 2 trebles, so a treble increase into the next stitch, and then 1 treble into the next one. For the Americans, that is 1 DC or 2 DCs into the one stitch, 1 DC into the next one. So you're working a pattern of 2 stitches, 1 stitch as you work around. This will give you the correct increases as you go to make sure you're working a nice flat circle. Once you reach the end, you'll do that final treble / double around the slip stitch, and then again you're going to do a slip stitch into the top of the first stitch of the round. By doing this, you can see we don't have any bars going across our work. For final round 4, you're going to start in the same way, so you'll chain 3, and then you will work your treble stitch, your US double stitch, into the base of the chain. So into that first stitch where you worked your slip stitch into, you'll do the same into there. Then you will proceed to work 1 treble, US double, into the next 2 stitches. So this time we're working 4 stitches per section. This gives you a nice flat circle to be working with, and your increases are nice and steady. Because of how we're joining our rounds, it's also doing an offset on our increases to make sure we're working a perfect circle and not creating more of a hexagon shape. Likewise, the previous round, you'll do your last stitch around the slip stitch from the end of the previous round, and then join with a slip stitch into the top of the first stitch instead of into the chain, and join with a slip stitch there. This finishes the main skull of your sugar skull. Now we need to start to create the jaw. So we're going to continue on from where we were, you will not fasten off, and we're going to do 2 chains. I like to work this next part as a linked stitch, so you're going to work your yarn into that first chain, pull up a loop as if to do a double, but stop there, insert your hook into the next stitch, and then complete your treble as normal. Into the next stitch you're going to do a half treble, a US half double, and then proceed to do 5 UK doubles, 5 US singles across the next stitches. This is squaring off the edge of the circle and will mean that we're able to create a squared off jaw section. Once you've done the 5 stitches, you'll do a half treble, a US half double, and then a treble into the final stitch, a US double. We'll then proceed to work back on ourselves in rows. So I will do 2 chains, again to do the linked stitch. If you're not comfortable with a linked stitch, that's okay, you can just do your 2 chains and then continue to work your trebles as normal. I like to work a linked stitch as it just tightens up that end and doesn't give you any bagginess. So when you're then working up the raw edge, it doesn't come away at all. You'll then proceed to work a treble, a US double, into each stitch across, so you end up with 9 treble double stitches as you go. Again, if you're unhappy doing the linked stitches, you don't need to. That 2 chain at the side will keep it tighter than if you did a 3rd chain, but it will just, if you do your linked stitch, it will give you that tighter edge and something just a little bit easier to work into when you're working up the raw edge to do the edging border of your skull. After the second row, you're going to complete the same again, so chaining 2. If you're working a linked treble, insert into that second chain from hook, pull up a loop but don't complete any stitches, and then continue to work your treble as normal. Again, if you're not happy doing a linked stitch, you don't need to. I just like the way it looks and it just gives me that nice firm edge to work my edging into. You'll then continue to work 8 trebles, US doubles, into the next stitches to the other side. Now that you've completed the jaw, we're going to end up working an edging around the outside just to neaten everything off. We're going to work this in a UK double, a US single, so it's not taking it out too much wider, but it means that our maths is slightly different from when we were increasing with our trebles / doubles. So to start with, you're going to work down the raw edge and you're going to work 2 stitches per treble. I like to work mine into the V's that are formed from the 2 levels of the treble stitch, or you can do one into the base of the treble and one into the top of the treble. As long as they're nice and evenly spaced, it's not entirely imperative where you do that. Because we did the linked treble stitch, it does give you an easier base to work into around the chain from the 2 chains that you did. It just gives you a stronger base to work into. Once you've done your 6 doubles, US singles, you're going to skip a stitch on the edge and you're going to work 2, so you're going to skip this stitch and you're going to work 2 doubles, US singles, into the first one. This is just going to give you that slight corner, slight increase. Then you're going to work a double, a US single, into the next 7 stitches, because had you worked this entire circle in doubles, singles, then you would be on your row of increasing every 8th stitch, so that the 8th hole is where you end up with your 2 stitches. So you want 7 singular stitches, 7 doubles or singles on their own, and then an increase single. Once you reach the end, you will end up having 2 stitches left, so you'll just work those 2 stitches and then you will do a increase into the final one, again to give you that corner as you then work into the raw edges. So by doing those final 2 stitches and just adding the second one in here, we're then going to skip that last one and start to work up the raw edge again. And again, you're going to do 2 doubles, US singles per treble. So you end up with 6 as you've worked up that row. This just gives you a nice even edge, not too many stitches. If you have too many, then your edge will pucker. If you don't have enough, it will just look really out of sorts. Then to do the corner, you'll work into the top of that first treble for that final stitch, do one chain and another double / US single into that stitch. You'll then continue to work doubles, singles into each stitch as you work across. Once you reach that last stitch, we'll work it, and then either you can do a chain and slip stitch into the top one, but what I like to do is work an invisible finish. So I've trimmed my yarn, I'm inserting into the top of the first stitch that I did down the side, pulling my yarn underneath the top, and then bringing it through the middle of the last stitch that I did. So just coming up through the back stitch, up through the middle there, and then pulling that yarn tail down through it, and this just creates a really seamless finish rather than having any sort of bulkiness. If you just want to slip stitch in, fasten off and sew in, that is also absolutely fine. To sew in your ends, simply take your needle, take your yarn end and fasten it through. I do recommend using a proper yarn needle with a bigger eye so that you can get it through easier, but I didn't have one to hand at the time, which is slightly annoying. So simply just thread your needle, and then on the back of your work, I take mine up through the horizontal bars of the trebles to the bottom of that first treble, and then I simply will put my yarn through the base of the stitches in order to hide it and make it nice and secure. You don't want to pull too tightly when you first sew the end in, so you don't want to make that invisible finish any smaller. Then once you've gone through, you can also then sew back through. You want to also do the same for the middle of your skull, and again I just take it up through and then around the base of the stitches above it, and that should be plenty secure enough, especially if you've done the magic loop with 2 strings around. So now we move on to the eyes for our sugar skull. Again, I'm doing a double wrap magic ring for mine, but if you would like to just do it with a chain start, you simply need to chain 2, or you can chain 4 and join and work your doubles all into the middle of your chain. So now you're going to work 6 doubles, that's US singles, into the centre of the magic loop. It's a bit harder to see with the black yarn on video, but you are just simply inserting your hook, no yarn over before you go in, yarning over to pull up a loop, that's pulling back through the centre, and then yarning over and pulling through both on your stitches. Once you're finished, again I just give the tail a slight pull to see which one is the first one that moves, to then pull the centre nice and tight, and then pull the second string tight. This means that my centre won't come undone as I work. Now what you're going to do to just finish off your eye is insert your hook into the first stitch that you did. I often find it easier to count back from the end to find that first one because it can get a bit confusing. And then we're simply going to sew in those ends, leaving a nice long tail for attaching. To finish off your eye, you're going to now work in a colour of your choice and attach it through, and then do 2 chains. I just throw mine straight in. You might want to slip knot on your hook first, that's fine. I just throw mine straight in because that's how I crochet. Then you're going to do a half treble, which is also known as half double for US, then do 1 chain, and then slip stitch into the next stitch along. So you're going to work 2 chains, a half treble, which is a half double for the US, into the same stitch that you did the slip stitch into. Or is it the next one long? Who knows? No, same stitch. And then you're going to chain 1 and then slip stitch into the next stitch along. You'll then continue to do this 6 times, so you've created 6 petals as you work around. So chain 2, a half treble / a half double for the US into the same stitch as the slip stitch, then chain 1 and slip stitch into the next stitch along. Once you've formed 6 stitches, you will then just fasten off, and I recommend stitching in your pink yarn and only using your black yarn to attach. You want to lay your eyes out so that the top of your eye is level with the middle of your main skull. I like to place mine and just make sure I'm happy with the placement before I then use the centre eye yarn tail to attach. So I simply just take it through the stitches beneath, and then I'll take it through the black as well. It can be a little bit fiddly, but just persevere. It took me so long to get these right and get them in the right places, but I was super happy with the placement in the end. Again, you're just going to take it through the skull. If you don't want to have any ends on the back, you can just take it through the fronts of the stitches, or if you're not fussed about what the back looks like, you can just stab it through. That's not a problem at all. It's entirely up to you how you do it. The longer tail you leave, the easier it will be to do. I think I left myself not quite enough tail, to be honest, to make it nice and easy on myself, but you do just want to attach it through. And then you'll do the same with the second eye as well. Before you start stitching on the second eye, you want to check your placement and make sure that they're level, that they're the same distance away from the edges. I was honestly so impressed with myself that I managed to do this first time without it going wrong. I am so notorious for sewing things into the wrong places. I literally just thread my needle and got it attached. So now we're going to move on to the decorations. So likewise with sewing on my eyes, I've just got a length of thread, a length of yarn for my decorations. I've just checked what my centre point is, and I'm just going to pull up through. So I'm creating a kind of leaf pattern here. You can decorate it in however you like, but I'm just going to take it up through and then create some petals off of that. So I'm trying to keep it central, but to be honest, it doesn't need to be perfect. The sugar skull art is all done by hand, so it can be slightly off centre and all that jazz. It will just look so cool. So I was simply using a kind of longer satin stitch and some what I would refer to as coaching stitches. I don't know if they have more specific names within embroidery, but that's just how I know it to be. So I've just come up the middle, making sure that I'm not pulling my yarn through. I'm then going to form the petals by bringing my needle up through where I want the base to be. And then once I've pulled through, making sure not to pull too hard so that the other threads don't get kind of puckered and pull tight. You're then going to create a loop with that string and then put your needle down through where you pulled up through. So I'm holding some yarn out to the side, sticking my needle back into the same hole, and then making sure that I don't pull my loop through. So just putting it not too tight, leaving it so that it has got this nice loop. If you think that you've put too much through, you can just pull it back a bit. Then holding it into place, I'm going to bring my needle up again, but this time at the point of the leaf. And again, I'm just going to come up through, wrap around the yarn that I've put there, and go back down through. So it kind of holds it in place. Don't want to do it too tightly because it will pull it through, but you do want to make sure that you are securing it. You do have a little bit of freedom to kind of pull on the yarns and even them out, but you don't have to worry too much about it. It's just such a fun technique to do, and you can do whatever you want really. This is just how I've decided to decorate mine. The other thing I decided to do was to use the French knots to make some dots around the bottom of the eye. So for this, you simply insert your needle coming up through the back and leaving yourself, making sure there's enough thread in the back so that you don't put it through. You wrap your needle 3 times from the top down towards the point, not the other way, and then push your needle through the same hole that you came up through and pull on it, and you'll just pull it through and this will knot it off. You can pull on the original end as well, just to make sure it's how you want it to be. Now to create the mouth, we're going to do it in a fairly similar way. So we're going to take black thread and then using your needle come through the back. I'm doing mine kind of 1 stitch from the end, so 1 treble from the end. So just inserting my needle through my fabric of my skull and then creating that middle line of the mouth across. You want to make sure that you're not pulling too tightly, that it does sit fairly nicely on top. If you pull too tightly, because of the nature of a crochet fabric, it will make odd holes and all that jazz, and you just don't want that. So I'm going to pull that through and just try and be nice and gentle with it so that I don't end up puckering the yarn and it just sits there nicely. I'm then going to create the kind of teeth as we go down. So we're going to evenly place 5 lines down. So you could do this by starting in the middle or starting either end and just kind of working up. We just want to make sure you're nice and even. Why, you know, as I work, all these yarn ends try and attack me every single time. On screen it might look nice and neat, but just off camera there is a whole mess going on. So I'm just making sure to put it through nice and evenly. Because we had 9 stitches across, by skipping a stitch we've now got 7 stitches that we're working with, and then skipping a stitch in again, so you're creating 5 lines basically where each of the stitches is, so that can be nice and straightforward. So I've put that first stitch in, and just to make sure that I get nice and even, I then skip to the other end to make sure that I'm placing that one kind of as evenly as I can. Again, it will basically just be at the point of the 5 stitches as we're working across. Worked mine by doing either end, doing the middle, and then doing the teeth in between, just to make sure it was nice and evenly spaced. Once you're finished, you can then use the same yarn to create your nostrils. So here, we're just finishing up coming down through, and then I just tied a knot to tighten it off. And there's your mouth. So now we're going to use the same thread to do the nostrils. We're going to do the nostrils much in the same way as I did the blue leaves at the top, and just coming back down through the same hole we went up in, making sure that it doesn't pull through too tight. You can adjust it as you go. So just holding it to where I want the nostril to sit, bringing my needle up through, making sure not to slip that thread, and then basically doing a coaching stitch to hold it in place. I don't know if this is also a slightly different technique with a different name when you're only doing it like this rather than in a whole line, but that's what I know to call it, so that's how I'm referring to it. If there is a better name for it, do let me know in the comments. Then you're just going to do matching the nostril on the other side as well, an exact same technique, just making sure that where you're putting it is roughly mirroring where you did the first one. Once you're finished with your nostril, you can knot it off on the back. I simply just tied my 2 ends together, careful not to pull anything through. And then you can slightly adjust your nostrils to get the shape that you desire. You could also add more coaching stitches if you wanted to. Thank you so much for watching my tutorial. If you'd like to support me so that I can give you more free tutorials, you can do so by purchasing the pattern on my website via the link in the description to this video. I hope you enjoy making it. Thank you so much for watching.